And now, without any further delay, I would like to turn today's live meeting over to your presenter, Leslie Courtenier. Leslie, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Leslie Courtenier, and this is the second part of the user experience session for Windows 8. For those who didn't follow the first part, this is the second part, and we are going to build a little bit upon the first part that we did on Tuesday. But if you want to, after this session, you can listen to the recording, which is available in the App Central, or you can join me for the next part 1 session next week on Tuesday. Just to explain a little bit about myself, for those who weren't here on Tuesday, I am Leslie Courtenier. I am a user experience designer from Belgium in Bruges, where I work at Perplexity as responsible for user experience design. Let's go over the program topics for today. So we're going to repeat a little bit what we discussed on Tuesday. So we're going to retake the Metro guidelines a little bit, but we're going to go more in depth into them. We're going to talk a little bit about snapping and scaling and why it's very important to take that into account, and also about designing for touch and a few tips and advices how you can take that into account when you're building a Windows 8 application. And the last one, which is also very important if you're building applications for brands or for companies that have high marketing campaigns or a very nice house style, how you can bring in the brand into a Windows 8 application and how you can apply creativity into a Windows 8 application. Now, the first thing that I would like to retake from Tuesday is the fact that user experience is about not making people feel like monkeys. I repeated it a couple of times last time, and it's just because I really want people to be aware, as well, developers as designers or anybody who is responsible for building applications. That's the main goal, making sure that when you're building something or you start to build something, that this is the first visual that you get before you start working on it. And if you remember me by a monkey, then that's fine by me if it makes sure that your application is great. But just to recapitulate a little bit about the Metro architecture, the guidelines, and what it's about. First of all, and I think that's the most important thing that's different in Metro design instead of building a normal website or another application, is that content comes before Chrome. And content really is the most important part. Let me see, there's something going wrong here with this slide. So I'll just talk about it. Content is the heart of a Windows 8 application. Content is priority. If you think about it, why do people go to an application? They want to read something, they want to do something, they want to get information, and that's basically the core of any application or any website. And that is what Windows 8 is trying to do for users, to do for people who are using applications, is that the content comes first. If you're going to an application for a news site, then the news comes first, and it's the first thing that somebody will see. Now, one thing I often hear One thing that I very often hear when talking about Windows 8 applications is that people are very afraid of putting just the relevant content on the screen because there's so much more that they want to put in that application. And when they're brainstorming about an application, they want to add a certain functionality or add something else in there or a nice gimmick. And then before you know it, an application is just filled with functions, filled with things to do, but there's no real vision anymore to the application, and when somebody downloads it and wants to use it, they just don't know what it's about anymore. But then people are afraid if they don't put in all that extra functionality that the application will become boring or something, but that's just not true. If you keep the application focused to what you aim at doing and keep it at one goal, then people will really love it, because then they will know, if I want to do X, then I just have to use application X, for example. So make sure that the content is the most important thing. Now, I said it also in the last session, content before Chrome, but what is Chrome? Chrome is basically, it's your layout, it's your interaction, it's your navigation, it's everything but the content. For example, on a website, you have a top navigation, maybe even a navigation on top of that, you have a navigation vertically, you have a navigation in the footer, and then you have all kinds of layout elements that indicate categories, you have layout elements that indicate advertising, that indicate other sections on a page. So that can become very, very filling. So that is what we are trying to take away with Windows 8, and that is why we have to use the content as a way of navigating the application. So how can we then change layout? Because of course we need to have a way of communicating with the user. We need to have a way of making differences between content blocks, between functionality and content, between advertising and content. We still need to be able to make that difference between all those content elements. But we can do that in a very crisp graphical way. We can do that by removing lines and boxes. We can do that by just adding in white space even. An intentional use of space. For example, if you want two tiles to belong together, you just put them together with a little bit of white space in between. If you have a next block of two tiles, but they do not belong to the first two blocks, then you just add a little bit more white space between the two groups of tiles, and then you will create a visual way of showing the user that there's a difference between the two content blocks without actually having to say it and without actually having to design something to make sure that people know the difference between the two. So there are a few ways, and I think typography is another one we discussed. We discussed it last time, that even typography is a great way of visually showing differences between content hierarchies in content. I used the example of a newspaper. And just by means of typography in a newspaper, the readers will see instantly what the difference is between a headline and a smaller article. They will see the difference between a headline and an advertising item in a newspaper. So that's really visual, powerful elements to make sure that people are finding their way to navigate your application without having to use heavy graphical elements in the page. So this is an example here of the RSS Reader. We briefly touched upon it last time as well, because I showed the actual Windows 8 version of this application. So here we have an RSS Reader. It's a normal Windows RSS Reader, the way we probably all know it and use it. We can add in RSS feeds from any website in there, so it can become a very heavy application. But if you look at it from a perspective of Windows 8, and even if you did follow last week's session, or you have read about Windows 8 up to now, then there are certain things that you could say about this application right now that you can say this is not very good. And if we actually look at it, and if we think in the vision of content is king, then if you look at it, what is the only content on the screen? It's the actual article, and the actual article is only 1/3 of the screen. And that is exactly what Windows 8 is trying to prevent, that content becomes only 1/3 of the screen. So first of all, if we're going to apply the layout advices and tips to this application, then it would look like this. So here we've taken away all the boxes, all the lines, all the visual chrome. And this is already one step in the right direction, but still the very core of what is Windows 8 has still not been applied, namely that the content comes first. This means that we have to turn it around. It's not 1/3 for the article and then 2/3 for navigation. We're just going to turn it around, and the actual articles become the navigation. And this is what I've shown also last time as a very good example of a Windows 8 application, because right now we have a hub-like page with the categories, and the categories are presented as blocks of tiles, and each tile is an article. And it's also been made very visual. If I want to see my RSS feeds for recipes, then instantly, very visually, I can see that it's the second one without actually having to read something. So that is what makes it very, very powerful. So Windows 8 is very visual, but it's not very chromed. It's visual, but it's visual with content. Everything on that screen is relevant because everything on that screen is exactly what I've been wanting to read. Now, last time we've talked a lot about architecture. Okay, it's a little bit wrong as well this time. We talked about architecture and about how if you want to build an application for Windows 8, and actually this advice goes for any kind of application that you want to build, is that you don't start by drawing lines on a paper, you don't start in Visual Studio or in Blend, you just start by building the content first. You start by defining your user. And if you've defined your user, you need to find out what it is that user wants. And based upon what you've come to know about your user, you can define what your content will be. And then you can, for example, make a tree structure. I have an example just in a minute. And after you've brainstormed about what the content is going to be like, you can start to build a sort of navigation. We have to navigate the content. You remember, with the hub and the spoke and the sections. And then you can storyboard the architecture. You can sketch it, and in the last part, you can design it in Photoshop or build it in Blend. So you see there's many different steps before you actually start in Photoshop or in Blend or in Visual Studio, whatever program that you're using to build applications. So there's an entire process in creating an application. First the content, then navigation, and then you actually just start drawing something, and then you start designing, and then in the final stage, you can do the development. Last time we just discussed the hub and the spoke and the section, but here in this session I just wanted to give you a few tips on how you can build an architecture or how that can look like. So I've talked a lot about content, and if content is the heart of the experience, then I think it's a good thing to give you a few tips on how you can build content. This is in Dutch because it's from a project that I've worked on, but this is a way of just starting to brainstorm about the content. And this is actually the content for an application for social services here in Belgium. And first thing you do is, just make an inventory of everything that the application needs to contain content-wise. And you build that inventory without adding categories, without adding in their hierarchy. Just make one list of everything that needs to be in there. And when you've created that list with content, with items that has to become part of the application, make sure that you do not add functionality in that list. This is just purely about the content, about the text, and about the topics that need to be available in the application. And once you've done that, then you can start by dividing your inventory into categories. Now, how do you create these categories? Well, first of all, you could ask the user. There are several usability techniques for that, but I don't think there's enough time to go into that. But you can just, if you have your inventory, you can start grouping together content items into categories. And this is what I've done here. The first one, for example, is a block of content which is all about living. The second one is all about financial aid. The third one is all about children and youngsters. So you see, so from a long list of content of everything that needs to be in the application, I'm starting to create content blocks. Everything that logically belongs together, you group it together. And after you've done that, then you can even start to prioritize your content. Because remember, in Windows 8, we have a horizontal pane in the hub, and everything goes onto that pane. So also we need to make sure we prioritize the content so that most important content will come first. And then if I give that advice to many people, then I get the feedback that that's not possible in my company because each department thinks that its content is crucial, is very important, but you have to, you have to work for the user and not for the people in your organization, because of course everybody that works there is feeling very motivated and is thinking from his own point of view, and it's your job as the person who builds the application to think from the point of view of the user and what is most important to him. And also keep in mind that if your application to that user, it's like I said the last time, in a split second they will decide whether the application is useful or not. So if you prioritize the content in a way that is interesting to the user, then you will have more chance that that user will say or decide that the application is good and he will start using it then again. So this is a way of starting out with content. Of course, you don't have to do that alone. A very good way of getting to such a list or such an inventory and then making categories for it is just by brainstorming and working with post-its and just putting all of the ideas on the table. That's a very good way. And then if you have a whole bunch of post-its on the table, then you can start by rearranging them into categories. That's also a very good way of doing that. So and then we have so let's say we've done our job. We've created a sort of content strategy. We have all the content laid out that needs to get into the application. So then what we can start doing is storyboarding. You don't need to be able to draw. You don't have to be an artist. I know I'm not, and I'm capable of doing these kinds of drawings. And this is very, very low level work. It's just making a visual mock-up of how the application should work, of how the user will go from point A to point B to point C and then back. So this is a very good way of creating an overview of your application without getting lost in your own thoughts. So this is a very good way of starting out, and the fun part about this is that, it's all just drafts, and if it's not good, you just throw it away and you start over. It's just pencil strokes. And this is a very good way of getting the application, in a clear way in your head before you can actually start to do real sketches. And then this is just an example that I've also shown last time. If you did the storyboarding, then you can start by actually doing the sketch work. And this is a sketch of a travel application. So if you remember 2 slides ago, we had all the content, and then we had the storyboarding, how they go from point A to point B. Then this is how the actual application would start to look like. So you see that we've started with purely text, and now we've evolved into an actual sketch phase. And this is the actual phase that when it's approved, then the design can come on top of it. But here we're actually building the content into the hub, the section, and the details, and how we go from point A to point B is also right in there. But of course, and I think also last time and up to now, we've been talking about the content, and we've been talking about how to sketch, how to do the content strategy, and how to lay it out in an architecture. But an application is really dead if there's no functionality to it. If there's no functionality, the application is rather useless. People also want to add some content. They will want to edit something. They want to share something. People need to be able to do something with the application, of course. And up to now, we haven't really seen how all that functionality will go into the application, because up to now we've been saying, okay, the content is the heart of the experience, and we need to be able to navigate the content. But we haven't been talking really about what to do if we're going to build a shop. How on earth are we going to make people order something if we can't put in the order button in the content? But that just all works via the app bars. So I'm going to do this as a separate topic because I think they're extremely important, and that they're actually done in a very good way. The app bars starts, of course, by thinking about which features and which functionalities you want to add into your application. And I think this stage will start with the same kind of process that you would do with your content, and that is just brainstorming about which features do we want to add into the application. If we have a travel application, what do we want people to be able to do with that application? Do we want them to be able to book? Do we want them to be able to send something to a friend? Do we want them to be able to save it into some sort of wish list? What do we want people to be able to do? And here again, we need to make sure that we don't make the application overloaded so that people don't have too many things to do. So this is a very vital part of the process in building a Windows 8 application, so that the features are very good. I've also added a topic on commercial features. For example, the book now, for example, ordering something, which we'll also discuss later on. Also, if we're going to add functions or features or commands to the application, we need to make sure that each function is specific to the page that we're on. In many applications, you have an entire bar with everything that you can do in the entire application, and then some are disabled, others are enabled, but here we're going to work in a different way. Here we're going to only show the features or the commands that we actually need on that page. Once again, it's about building for a solution. It's not building for distraction. So we need to make sure that people aren't distracted from their goal. And if their goal on a certain page is to share something, then we need to make sure that their attention will go to the sharing and not to some other stuff that they can't even do, but it's there in any case. So that's something to really take into account. So I think the best way of explaining how to build an app bar is just by using examples. So this is an application. Let's say it's a restaurant application where you can actually make a dinner plan with friends. So the first thing that we can do is create a dinner plan. As you can see there on the right, we can create a new plan. But we can also select a restaurant, or we can select a plan, and then you can see entering that we can vote, and then we can vote in, veto, or out. So here we can already see that there is a difference between command sets, and we have command sets on the right side, and we have command sets on the left side. Now, what's the difference between the two? On the right side, we have the actual global commands, and on the other side, we have the commands which are really contextual. When you select something, when something needs to be done on that page specific or on that content on that page specific, then it goes on to the other side of the application. Why we use the outside of the application, of the bar, is something that we'll explain in the topic when we're talking about design for touch. So let's keep a little further. A very important feature or a very important principle or advice that I can give you if you're going to build user-friendly applications is that we need to keep the command sets in consistent positions throughout the app. Now, what do I mean by that? I just told you that it's very important that we only put in, or that we only show the commands that have to be visual on a certain page or in a certain context, which means that the app bars will switch. If we select something, you will have different commands. If we go to a different page, we have another command set. So it will change from time to time. But it's very important that if you put a command, let's say on the second position of the right, then it needs to be there throughout the entire application when it has to be there. So if on 3 pages that command has to be there, then it needs to be there on that same spot because people will expect it there. It's about consistency, and it's about the learnability, which I also talked about last time, and how can an application become very learnable. That is, if we keep it consistent so that people will intuitively start to know where the things are. Because if you do that consistently, that helps people learn an application. So let's go back to our example. So we're on a different page right now in the application. So we're on on the restaurant page. So we have all kinds of restaurants which we can browse and we can do stuff with. So we can go to a list view, we can go to a map view, we can filter the restaurants, we can sort them even, and then we can select one and not select one. So there's many features or commands in one page that need to go into the app bar. So let's see. First of all, again, like in the last page, we can create a new plan. And that new plan is actually something that you can do in the entire application. So that actually needs to be there practically always. Then we have a list view. And we also have a map view. So we need to be able to switch between the two. If we're in the list view, then we need to be able to sort. We need to be able to sort by rating, by convenience, and by category. So you see that the app bar is already filling up, and we only have that limited space. So how are we going to deal with it? So let's look further. If we're in the map view, then we can search the map area, or we can just search by my location, see what's around me. If we're back in the list view, we had the sorting. But we can also filter. So you see now we're creating a problem because the app bar is not large enough. And you could say, okay, well, then we could work in 2 rows. But we can actually be smarter. And we can actually be more strategic by building this app bar. So let's see how we can fix that. First of all, we can start by grouping together the commands that belong together. For example, we had 3 sorting options. We'll put them together and then work with flyout menu. The same thing we can do with the filtering. So we've put them all together into one grouped command. If we click it, then we can filter with the flyout menu. If we then now there's one thing very important here. So we have several views. We have a list view, we have a map view, we have sorting, we have filters. In the map view we can do other stuff. So it's important. And then the storyboarding comes back in. If you storyboard the entire application and every page, then you can add the app bars to it as well. And then you will see these kinds of problems very fast. And then you will also very fast see that if you switch from list to map and back and forth, that you can see that the app bar, so that the commands in the app bar stay in their consistent position, so that the sorting and the filtering, that they may be switched, for example, so that they also always stay in the same spot. So it's important to keep, to draw it out, draw everything on every page so that you can spot these kinds of possible problems of a command needing to switch places with another command because otherwise it won't stay in the consistent position. So here's just a little wrap up, a few keys to a great feature set placement. It's that, well, first of all, you need to think about context, keep the command sets in consistent positions. And what you can also do, it's what you've seen here, you can separate command sets by a separator. So I think that's probably the only layout visual that you can use to separate a few items from each other. And also follow the conventions. And these conventions are, it's like I said, so new, add, start, create, compose. They are on the far right of the app bar. So everything that is basically global and which is basically a feature that can be used throughout all levels of the application have to go on the far right. Commands that can show on selection or that actually manipulate the page that you're on go on the far left. For example, the map view and the list view is something that will actually manipulate the content that we're looking at right now. So that will go on the far left. And then there's some other conventions like accept and reject. They appear with accept on the left of reject, and view switching appears on the left as well. So that's what we've seen, the map and the list view switch. Now, of course, there's a fine line between what's global and between what's contextual. So it's always going to be a little bit of strategizing, and it's always going to be you being critical in terms of finding out whether the feature that you want to add into the application, that you want to add into the app bar, if it's global or if it's contextual. It's always a balance that you will need to be able to find. Now, there's one thing that we haven't talked about before, and it's about commercial features. And I'm all about following guidelines, but I'm also all about usability, and I'm also all about actually selling stuff, because many applications are commercial. They have economic reasons, so they need to, there's a business model behind them. I think about stores, I think about where you can buy stuff. And that's when persuasive design comes in, and a lot of web shops that are on the web, so websites, they make use of persuasive design to just, to persuade people, to motivate people to actually buy that item that they're looking at. And how they do that is by very prominently putting the book now or the buy now icon, even putting in their promotions. So that's a very persuasive way. It's like in a shop itself, there's going to be a shop assistant there to help you. But in fact, they just want to sell that item to you. And that's something that we can't forget if we're building Windows 8 applications. So if you're a travel website and booking of holidays is the most important thing on that website, then I think that here we can make an exception and put a book now button or a buy now button on the screen itself without having to put it in the app bar. So I'm all about following guidelines, but I'm also about actually reaching your goals. And I think most of the time, if you're building an application that needs to bring in money, then you want conversion. And to make sure that you have conversion, then you need to make sure that you persuade people to do something. And I think persuasion is a very good argument not to put something in the app bar. Just make sure that you keep a very good balance between the Windows 8 vision and philosophy, and then actually the commercial economic reasons for putting something on the screen itself. So that's just my advice for commercial features. So another very important part of Windows 8 is the snapping and the scaling. So let's go have a look at that. So Windows 8 is a little bit more complicated than building, for example, an iPad application, because if you're building something for iPad, you're building for one resolution only. The thing with Windows 8 is that it's going to come through many devices, laptops, PCs, tablets, and even them, a desktop can come in, a screen monitor can come in several sizes, also a laptop. So there's many different screen estates that we have to cater for and that we have to make sure that we build the application for. So that's something to really take into account. Here are the three things that you need to take into account if you're building an application for Windows 8. It's the screen size, which I just talked about. Snap and portrait, which is a problem or an issue to take into account for any kind of tablet that you're building an application for, and also the pixel density. So think about the things that I've talked about last time in your taking pride in your craftsmanship, making sure that everything is perfect. And I think being pixel perfect is just, the tip of the best that you can do. So why would you care about screen size? If you have more screen, it means that you can put more content into it, more productivity in the same application, which means that if a person invests in a very large monitor, that you can actually make sure that that person can have a much better experience using that application than on a small screen. Snap and portrait, of course, people, they hold their tablets in any way that they like to hold it. If they want to hold it in portrait, if they want to hold it vertically, we need to cater to that. We need to make sure that we cater for any way a user wants to visit an application, and we have to make sure that we're ready for that. And then the pixel density, it's all HD and it needs to look crisp. If you have a picture in there and people are looking at it at a very large screen and it's pixelized, then that's not really good. So one very important aspect to take into account, the minimum app resolution is 1024 by 768. That's actually the minimum, and it's not that it will look bad if it's lower, it will just not work. So if you want to build an application, and if you're building it for several months and then you find out that it doesn't work, that's not really motivating. So keep that in mind. But if you really want to start designing your application in a very good way, just start by 1366 by 768. So that's a very good way to start. And I think from there on you have a very good foundation. And if you do nothing, then this is how your application will look on different screens. And I don't think you want that to happen. So this is a user with a very large screen, and you've not taken advantage of that. So that's a pity. What you could have done here, for example, is just making sure that the application scales along with it. And there's two things that you could have done, making sure that there's another row added. So now we have 2 rows of tiles. If the screen's larger, add in another row so that you have 3 rows, 4 rows. I don't know how big monitors can get. And another way of doing it is just to enlarge everything. Another part of the Windows 8, which is a very good one, in my opinion, is the Snap View. The Snap View, so this is an application of Twitter. And a Snap View means that a person will put, let me show you an example here, yes. So a person will snap your application into the side and will see it in a vertical way on the side of the screen. The huge advantage that the Snap View has is that people will leave your application running on a screen while he or she is doing something else. That's a very huge compliment that a user can give you, because that means that your application is great enough or useful enough for the user to actually leave it there whilst doing something else. So if you have a type of application that could come into the situation of being snapped, make sure that your Snap View is great. Make sure that it's catered to the needs of the user. And what I mean by that is that you need to think about in which kind of situation will your user want to snap your application. Like Twitter, for example, is a very easy one. You just snap the application and you will just get your feed, because that's what you want to see. If it's a news application, my guess is that people just want to see the headlines showing up as and when they arrive on the website, so that you just see the news. If I would be into stock exchange and I have a stock application or a finance application in my Snap View, I would just want to see any kind of news or the stock changes. So that's what I would want to see in the Snap View. So if you're building an application, don't just build a vertical alternative to the application. Build something that really caters to being snapped. So let's see. Voila, that's what we just talked about. It says here that all apps are snappable, which is true, but I think, in my opinion, not every app will have a reason to be snapped. So just make sure that you really think about that. If your application has an opportunity there, then really make sure that you cater to it. If it's not, don't waste too much time on it. If you're designing for Snap, so here's the layout guidelines. It's 320 pixels in width, always. And in Snap View, you will always scroll vertically instead of horizontally, and also always in one column. A very important thing as well for the Snap and the app bar that we just discussed, is that if you use buttons with a label in the normal application, you will not do so in Snap. So buttons have no labels, and only 5 buttons can fit in a row, and here you can work in 2 rows. Just make sure it's a Snap View, meaning that there's not very much space. Just make sure you keep that low level and low productive, because if people want to really use the full functionality of the application, they will just go to widescreen again. Make sure that there's some sort of side functionality to the Snap View, that people can use your application along with something else. And also, once again, grouping commands together is also a very good strategy in Snap View. Voila, there it is. So then, one very important thing, we've touched on it very briefly last time, it's designing for touch. Now, why is design for touch so important in Windows 8? And I don't think the answer is very difficult. It's because for Windows 8, the tablets and the touchscreens are very important. It's also a user interface that is really built towards touch interaction. So that's very important. Most of us have been building applications for desktop or have been building websites. So most of us have been building applications and websites for interacting with your mouse and keyboard, which is basically a different kind of interaction than with your hands. So let's have a look. Again, and I think in touch, that's extremely important that you don't make people feel like monkeys. So if something is touch enabled, then we have to make sure that it's done really well, that a touch object is actually touchable, and that something that's not touchable, that it's very apparent that it's not touchable, so that people don't try for 10 times to touch something and nothing happens, the application's broken, and then you start to feel like a monkey because you keep on pushing the same thing and nothing's happening. And then you get frustration, of course. So I like to remind people of that once in a while. So a couple of things about touch. Touch is sloppy because you touch something and then something needs to happen. There's also only two states. There's touch and no touch. With the mouse, you have several functions. If you point to something, you have a mouse over, you have your right mouse click. So there's a lot of things that you can do with your mouse on top of one object. With touch, that's not the case. You either touch the screen or you don't, and there's nothing in between there. Another potential problem is the difference between sliding and tapping, because in order to slide, you need to tap the screen as well. And then also there's a multi-simultaneous input. So if we touch with 4 fingers, then we need to make sure that the application doesn't crash and that it actually is important that it can cater for that. So you need to make sure that you know these kind of constraints when you're building a touch-first application. Another thing to keep in mind is the postures. Okay, just 1 second because my TV is going on mute. Okay, my TV was going to sleep. My apologies. So there's different postures that people will take on when they're using a tablet, and here you can see just only a few of them. They can keep it in portrait. They can hold it with 2 hands. They can lay the tablet on their laps and then just start working on it, or then they could just watch it, or if they're watching an episode of something. And that is really something that we need to take into account if we're building a touch-first application. Like the second gesture posture, for example, is actually one of the reasons that the app bar is built the way it's built, with all the commands on the side, so that you can just, by using your 2 thumbs, that you can actually do all the interactions on your application. So that is the very reason. Okay, right, on to the next one. So, like I said before, touch or no touch, only 2 states, which also implies that you need to be able to do the manipulation directly. That means that if people touch the screen, that they need to be able to get immediate feedback, that there are no thresholds, and that every interaction that you're doing, that it's reversible. If you go over something with your mouse, and it gives you a little bit of feedback, then you don't have to do something. But if you actually touch the screen and something happens, then you don't really know what you've touched, because it was a touch that you didn't really want to do, or because you were just changing the posture of the tablet. So you need to be able to cater to that as well. Also very important is that the interactions need to be learnable. And that is what I've showed last time as well, is that Windows 8 has a certain set of communications. It has a certain set of interactions in touch. For example, the pinching, the sliding. Make sure that you use these interactions when you're building an application. It's the same thing that goes for the advice that I gave you when building an app bar or building an interface. It's that consistency. And if all applications throughout the Windows 8 ecosystem will use the same touch language, then people will feel more motivated, and they will feel more intuitive in learning that application. Okay. So this is also indirect manipulation. One thing that I've already spoke about before is that you need to be able to allow any number of fingers, because there's no way of guessing if a person will slide or pan with one finger or with 2 fingers or even with 3 fingers. We just don't know, and we need to be able to cater to that. So you need to be able to allow any number of fingers. And you just don't program a panning, for example, with 1 finger. Then if a person uses 3, then the application would crash or not know how to respond to that. So that's a way of keeping things intuitive and also keeping things natural, because people use their hands the way they're used to. Just to give you one example, if you're holding a fork, then if you would see 10 people in a restaurant holding their forks, each and every one of these persons will hold their forks in a different way. So everybody uses kind of the same gestures, but it's always slightly a little bit different. And the same thing goes for people using a touch interface. If you see 10 people interacting with their tablets, computers, then you will see that they will try different things, because they want to do the same thing, but one person will just use its entire hand to pan alongside the horizontal axis. The other one will just use 1 finger. So that's also something to be very aware of. And I think this one is even more important. It's about timing of touches. You need to keep them untimed. I think in the early days of touch applications, you would see that, for example, because you have a short touch and then something would happen, and a long touch would recreate another interaction. And they would time that. So, for example, a short touch is 2 seconds, and then a longer touch is 5 seconds. Now, of course, you can imagine that people are not going to sit there using that application counting till 5. And what is counting to 5? I can count to 5 in 2 seconds. So you see, that's very difficult to time interactions, because then it's then that you will get error, because 5 seconds to me is not 5 seconds to you. So if you use tap, or if you use tap and hold to recreate another interaction, then just keep that untimed. A tap is a tap, and if you do a long tap, then, you know, if people want to hold for 10 seconds, then the same interaction needs to be able to get across as when you would tap and hold for like 5 or 6 or 7 seconds. Because what you will get then, if you time it too fast, then you will have accidental interactions. If you type too fast and people briefly touch something, then an action will happen that they didn't want to happen. And if it's too slow, it's inefficient, and people might think it doesn't work, because the interaction that you've programmed is programmed at 10 seconds, whereas the person only has the patience to tap or to press and hold for only 5 seconds. And I think the best way is just keeping them untimed. So this is an example of touching. Voila. So instead of time gestures, you can use the touch language, swipe to select, and then use drag and drop, for example. So there are several ways of not having to time your touch interactions. And then this is the most important one, I think, also usability-wise. It's the visual feedback. If it's like I said in the beginning about if you really want to make a person feel like a monkey, then just make them guess what can happen if they touch something. And think about your mother or your grandmother. With their first computer, they're really afraid of touching anything, even with the mouse, because they think, whatever I'll do, I'll break it. And it's that kind of fear that we need to be able to get away from. We need to make sure that people are comfortable using our applications and our websites. And if we don't provide visual feedback when people are touching on the application, if nothing happens, or if something happens that they didn't expect to happen, then they will become afraid to do anything else, or they become frustrated or unmotivated to continue. And remember what I said in the beginning, it only takes a second for a user to decide whether to use your application or not. And how can you do that? If you touch the application, you can already immediately give feedback that something's going to happen. And I think the most basic example of this is just the tiles. If a tile is touchable, and if something happens afterward, the moment you touch it, it needs to, go in a little bit 3D-wise, so that people actually see I'm touching this tile and something's happening. And then, for example, if afterwards they want to touch a picture that is just there for visuality, or just for communication, but nothing's underneath, if they tap that one and nothing happens, then they know, okay, there's nothing behind it. So this way they can learn for themselves without needing to take a manual what is touchable and what there's not. It's very important to keep that visual feedback. Another example of visual feedback, for example, is a drag and drop. If you're building something where people need to be able to drag an object to another place, then that object has to follow the finger. Because if you're dragging something and you release it somewhere else and it just pops out and pops up on the other place, then it's a little bit awkward, because in the process of you dragging, you're thinking it's not working. And then, for example, you stop in the midst of the process. So if you want to use drag and drop, you need to give that visual feedback from, hey, it's working because you drag your finger along the screen, and the object is actually following your finger. So that's another example of visual feedback. And then the last topic that I want to discuss is adding branding to an application. Because when Windows 8 was first released, and we would talk to marketing people or really creative designers, they were a little bit afraid of Windows 8 applications, because you'd get feedback that, all these applications, they're all the same. We're not allowed any creativity anymore. They all follow the same architecture. And I'm working for, let's say, just an example, Coca-Cola. I mean, they're very big on their brand. I can't just imagine that they would use just the Sego UI for their name. So that's something that they were really worried about. But it's actually possible to add branding to a Windows 8 application. It's just in a different way. But think about it, maybe it's even a better way for the user, because we're not overdoing it anymore. So to explain how we can add branding to an application, I'll just use that in an example. So this is one of the examples I often use in the workshops that I give. This is just a website with food trucks, and you can see some of the elements of the company itself. How can you recognize that it's about the food truck website? It's well, first of all, it's green. It has a certain typography. It has a logo on top. So there are certain brand elements into that website that we want to recreate that in the application. And then so from this website, if we go through the entire strategy, remember, thinking about the user first, and then we've extracted all the content, put it in an inventory, then making sure that everything is categorized, and then seeing what doesn't belong in the screen real estate, and so on and so on. So if we go through the entire process, then this is, for example, the first version of the Windows 8 version of that website. So it could be as dry as this, just with the name, and then the featured trucks and categories, and the tiles. And the tiles, they come back always in every application. But then if you look at it, you can actually add branding to the website. First of all, in the title, you can add the logo of the company, and I think you should. And if the logo of the company is actually just the name, like for example Coca-Cola or the New York Times or McDonald's even, they have the name in a certain font, in a certain color, then you can actually just replace the title in Segro and just replace it with a logo over there. That's no big deal. And then also you can work with the backgrounds. Here you can see that the background of this application is an actual food truck. You can also work, for example, with the logo. If the logo, like for example, in McDonald's, I think the M is extremely recognizable. So I can imagine that people at McDonald's would want the M to come back in their application and to be there very prominently. Well, then you could use that in the background and work with that M. You can use colors to add a little bit of style to the application. So you can work with the colors of the company, work with pictures, and then also work with the background. And also make sure that you know that you are not obligated to use the tiles and only the tiles, because I know and I'm very much aware of the fact that in most workshops and in most sessions, we will always show you applications that are very much tile-based, but that's not an absolute, it's not an obligation to do so. You can be more creative with products or with brands, so you really don't have to stick to the tile-based design. It's just the best way of getting started with building Windows 8 applications, but it doesn't have to stay there. I would be thrilled to see many creative applications that go away from the tile-based design but keep the horizontal flow and the hub and the section and the spoke. And I think if creatives meet Windows 8, then that would become really awesome applications. And I think that's the best message that I can give everybody, is to just, try and take your application in Windows 8 to the next level, and then it will rock, definitely. So that's it for me for now. I hope it was worthwhile for you, and I hope for the people who didn't join the session on Tuesday, everything was clear enough. If not, you can join me on the expert chats on Friday. I think it's from 11 o'clock, 1 hour I'm available for chat, or you can ask your questions in the Q&A right now. I'll stick around for a while. You can listen to the recording of part 1 in the App Central, or just join me for part 1 next week on Tuesday. Thanks very much, and I'll give it back to Tanya.